Physics, the simulation argument. In 2003, Oxford University philosopher Nick Bostrom had an article published in Philosophical Quarterly. In this, he suggested that it was almost certain that we were all living in a computer-generated simulation of our lives. In simple terms, his argument goes as follows. We know from the famous Moore's law that computer processing power doubles every 2 or 3 years. There is no reason to believe that this will not continue for some time to come, the only restrictions being how small we can make printed circuit boards. Indeed, a new area of research called quantum computing suggests that processing power may be almost limitless for future generations. If humanity survives and moves into a post-human phase, that is, that we evolve in such a way that our technology and ourselves will become melded in some way, then this infinitely processing power will be readily available. So what will our post-human ancestors do with the processing power? Bostrom suggests that it is inevitable that they will create ancestor simulations and will populate these simulations with the people who lived in history. If today's technology is anything to go by, it is reasonably clear that Bostrom was right in his assumption that future scientists will attempt to create ever more realistic computer-simulated virtual realities. For example, on September 16, 2020, the high-technology company Oculus announced the release of a virtual reality headset known as the Quest 2. This was to challenge the marketplace of similar headsets such as Oculus's own Rift and the HTC Vive Pro. When donning the headset and switching it on, the observer enters a totally believable three-dimensional environment indistinguishable from everyday reality. Such is the effect of the simulation that software designers have deliberately made the virtual reality environment less accurate, as there have been concerns that photorealistic environments could be psychologically damaging. But in the final analysis, these are game-related environments that are, by their very nature, unreal. But recent developments in technology have allowed researchers to create totally accurate renditions of actual reality. It's all to do with an application of something known as quantum chromodynamics, a process that describes the workings of one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature, the strong nuclear force. This is the force that binds quarks and gluons together to form protons and neutrons. We are now in the position to be able to program computers to simulate how this force develops. Using the world's most powerful supercomputers, scientists have been able to simulate a tiny corner of the cosmos, a few femtometers across. A femtometer is 10 to the minus 15 meters. It sounds like a ridiculously small amount of area, in fact a quadrillionth of a meter. What is intriguing about this development is that this small area of reality has been fully simulated in a computer program. Indeed, it is to all intents and purposes indistinguishable from the real thing. We are only restricted by computer power in this regard. Given a big enough computer containing tiny transistors, it is only a matter of time before the region of a few micrometers will be reached. This is large enough to simulate a human cell. If this is the case, then it is not beyond comprehension that we may have sufficient computing power to simulate a whole universe in a few hundred years. With this in mind, could it be possible that a hugely advanced civilization has already simulated a universe, and that we exist within it? If our perceptual reality is really a version of Gallimore's instantation, in which we experience our lives not just once but many times, each one being accommodated by programmed outcomes to each decision we make, the case must be made for the information field in which each universe is built. And this is where this discussion will now go. Physics, it from bit. According to the historical model of scientific knowledge, the physical world can initially be described using mathematical notation. Objects can be measured using number systems. These can involve measures of distance and weight. These number systems can be manipulated in various ways using geometry, arithmetic and algebra. In itself, this is quite a curious thing. Is mathematics a creation of the human mind, or is it something intrinsic to the universe? Do mathematical equations exist independent of the human mind in that we discover them, or are they a creation of human intelligence, a structure that we have imposed upon a chaotic cosmos? From mathematics we can create physics, the direct study of physical objects and the space in which they exist. Once we have the physical science to open up our understanding of the universe around us, we create information. The model is therefore a simple progression of mathematics, physics, information. In the last 40 years or so, some scientists have argued that this progression is incorrect, and that the primary entity from which reality is built is information itself. The founding father of this revolution in thinking was the great American physicist John Archibald Wheeler. Wheeler had earlier proposed a staggeringly ornate thought experiment in which he used the implications of the double slit experiment to show that not only is it likely that conscious observers collapse the wave function of what happens now, but also the same act of observation brings into existence events that took place billions of years ago. Known as the delayed choice experiment, this puts consciousness centre stage as the prime creative force in the universe. He later called this the participatory universe model. If you're interested in knowing more about this, please read pages 58 to 60 of my book, Is There Life After Death? The Extraordinary Science of What Happens When We Die. Wheeler subsequently linked this to the anthropic cosmological principle by describing his model as the participatory anthropic principle, PAP. Many scientists dismiss this as being outlandish. That was until 2007. When an accurate replication of Wheeler's delayed choice experiment proved beyond all reasonable doubt that observers' consciousnesses are required to bring the universe into existence. The reference here is Jacques and Roche, 2007. In 1998, Wheeler worked with one of the pioneer thinkers of information technology, Rolf Landauer, to create a model of reality whereby consciousness creates reality out of information. He called this process it from bit. Wheeler wanted to answer the question of how something comes from nothing. His solution was that that everything that is perceived is created from digital information. In a work published in 1990, he described this quite precisely. Quote, "It from bit. Otherwise put, every it, every particle, every field of force, even the space-time continuum itself, derives its function, its meaning, its very existence entirely, even if in some contexts indirectly, from the apparatus elicited answers to yes-no questions, binary choices, bits. It from bit symbolises the idea that every item of the physical world has at bottom, a very deep bottom in most cases, an immaterial source and explanation. That which we call reality arises in the last analysis from the posing of yes-no questions and the registering of equipment-evoked responses. In short, that all things physical are information theoretic, in origin, and that is the participatory universe." End quote. It has been shown that Wheeler may have been right about the relationship between the observer and reality. But what about the evidence for the second part of his model, that reality is digital in nature? Physics, holographic model of reality. In an article published in July 2014, Craig Horgan, a cosmologist at Fermilab, hypothesized that our macroscopic world is like a four-dimensional video display, arguing that if we stir deeply enough into the structure of matter, we will discover the bitmap of our holographic universe. In the same way as the closer you look at a computer screen, you will eventually spot the individual pixels. In 2013, an astonishing discovery was made by a team working with the German GEO 600 gravity wave detector in Germany. They found the pixelation that Horgan had suggested would exist if the universe was a hologram. Erwin Laszlo and I made the following observation regarding the discovery back in 2014. Quote, "Let us consider that the volume of space-time is the distance that light has travelled in all directions from the Big Bang in the approximately 13.8 billion years that have elapsed since then. Suppose further that the circumference is papered by 2D codes of Planck size, where each side of the square is a Planck length, which is 10 to the minus 35 meters, and that each of these square codes one bit of information. Events in the volume of space-time would then be 3D projections of these 2D codes at the circumference. Given that the volume of space-time is larger than its circumference, the difference can be calculated by dividing the area of the circumference by the volume. It follows that if the 2D codes at the circumference are Planck dimensional squares, the 3D events within the volume must be in the order of 10 to the minus 16 meters. It turned out that the ripples found by the GEO 600 gravity wave detector are precisely of this size." Unquote. Suppose the perceptual universe that is presented to our senses is, in effect, a simulation. In that case, there should be powerful evidence that this universe has a close relationship with the observing consciousness. Is this why the cosmic anthropic principle is so convincing? That it is evidence that this perceptual universe seems to have been fine-tuned to create consciousness because that is how it was programmed to develop. We are here to observe a universe that needs us to bring it into existence, and we need it to bring us into existence. So where does all this information that encodes the multiverse which you and I can exist over multiple lives, experience every possible outcome of every decision you can make exist? Is it on some colossal computer running in an alien civilization's laboratory? Has it been created by our descendants in the far future for their entertainment? In order to design an ancestor sim? Could it be that the bits are encoded in the Planck area squares on the inner boundary of the universe? Or could there be another alternative? Physics, zero-point field, Akashic field. When we talk about heat or temperature, we're really describing the amount of energy given off by a substance. This energy is generated by the particles, the molecules or atoms that make up the substance. They are vibrating. This vibration, technically known as an oscillation, is brought about by energy being taken from the local environment by the particle and turned into radiant heat. As temperatures get lower, less energy is available, and the substance gets colder. However, there is a point where no more energy can be taken from the environment, and the oscillations stop. This is known as absolute zero, which is now being precisely measured as minus 273.15 Celsius. By definition, there should be no energy available for any substance to raise its own temperature level away from this. But it has been discovered that substances such as liquid helium remain liquid when they're placed in an environment very close to absolute zero, where there is no energy available. When there is no energy available, the helium should become a solid, but it doesn't. There is another form of energy where energy should not be, a place known as the quantum vacuum. This energy is known as zero-point energy, and it is believed that it is evidence of a field of energy that may be almost limitless in its potential. But what is even more amazing is that researchers such as my co-author, Nobel Prize-nominated Irving Laszlo, have suggested that this almost limitless field stores digital information similar to a computer hard drive or DVD. Laszlo proposes that it is within this vast field of information, or information that he terms it, that the brain creates the world around us. Not only that, but this field of information contains within it code that can create three-dimensional holographic images of everything that has ever happened and everything that can happen. In other words, time itself is an illusion, and everything that has been, is and will be exists in a permanent, timeless now. All it needs to come into existence is a brain to process it. Laszlo calls this model the Akashic field, and suggests that this is identical to the concept of the Akasha found in Hinduism and Vedanta. In 2012, a new form of matter was discovered known as the FQH, fractional quantum Hall state. This discovery suggests that all the fundamental particles that collectively create matter within space-time are actually excitations in an underlying non-physical matrix. This was followed in 2013 by the discovery of a geometrical object known as an amplituhedron. This added to the mystery by suggesting that the geometry of the universe we perceive through our senses reflects a deeper level of reality, and that our perceived universe is mathematical rather than physical. Both these discoveries are suggestive of Plato's idea of the forms.